Welcome to episode 9. Mr. T here again, and in this episode we are going to be focusing on colliders. So far we have our player, we have our animations, basic pixel art with a gray boxed level prototype, and my level is, my backgrounds are parallaxing nicely, so I like that. But right now there is nothing that can hurt us. We can fall as far as we want. There are nothing that we could run into. We can't even jump off the screen, and we need to fix that. So we need some things that are going to hurt us. So let's dive into that. First, I'm going to clean up a couple things. We don't need any of this old stuff, these old platforms that I had brought in previously. So I'm going to get rid of them and delete those. So just going to grab those and delete them out of the hierarchy. Also, I got 3 things called backgrounds, and just to clean that up, let's create a new empty and call that, we'll call that parallax. Backgrounds. Put it all into one, so then I can grab all 3 of those and just pop that right onto there and minimize that. Okay, so now we have a really simple hierarchy. We got our camera with our Cinemachine virtual camera here working from a previous video. We have our player with a ground check, and we have our level grid for our tile map here. So what do we want to do? First, let's bring in a really common hazard in platformers like some spikes. So you can find this in the shared art folder, but I've already downloaded it, and I'm going to import it again, going import new asset. Actually, let's go into my artwork folder and do it here. Right click, import new asset. And we're going to grab that from, let me just find it in my folders here. Pixel platformer. Okay, and let's look at most recent. Okay, so we want our spikes map. I'm going to bring that in. I'm also going to bring in this laser beam, which you're going to see later on. So I'm going to import both of those. We'll deal with the laser beam in a little bit. But let's modify the spikes map first. So with our import settings, this is a tile map, so I want to set it to multiple. This is 32 by 32 pixels, so we'll change that. We'll also change the filter mode to point and none on the compression. Open up, we'll apply that, then open up the sprite editor. Inside the sprite editor, we just want to slice this up for my spikes. So really simple artwork here that allows me to put it on top, bottom, left, and right walls and platforms. So we're going to slice that up. We're going to go by cell size. Or maybe I should show another one. Let's go by cell count. So we have C is for columns, so I can put that by 4 and by 1, and it slices it up just as good as doing the pixel measurement. So just wanted to show you another way to do that. Apply, and now we have our sprite. We've edited the sprite into these sliced smaller ones, and you can see that spikes map 1, 0, 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, let's bring that into our grid. So in our grid here, we have our level and we have a tile palette already. Now, I could bring in this spikes map right into here and have that added to the tile palette. Again, I'll save it right in here, same folder. And I could use it there, and that works just fine. We still have lots of room. If you want to separate your tile maps, that's fine. I'll keep it all under our tile palettes. We'll keep it under gray box. What's important here is we got to be aware of active tile map. We only have one. We just have the level, and I don't want a normal collider on here. Okay, this is going to be a different layer mask that's going to hurt us, not something we can walk on. So we're going to go over here to our grid. We're going to right click and we're going to go to 2D object, and we're going to add another rectangular tile map. This one I'm going to call hazard. Okay, or hazards. We're going to call that one hazards. And now with this one, we see level, we have a layer called ground, and hazards, it's going to default to the default. We're going to add a new layer here. Now, this type of layer up here has to do with layer masks and collisions. So we're going to add a new one underneath ground here and just call it hazard. This is our hazard layer. Okay. And then we'll go back to hazards and we'll set that up. That's super important. Okay. And then we can add the 2D box, the tile map collider. So we want that on there now. So I can run into this and we will be good to go. We don't want to set it as a trigger for this. We'll leave it as is. And I think, yeah, that's all we need to do there. Next, we are going to put some spikes in our level. So let's now notice that I have 2 of these. So I want to make sure we are on the hazards layer. Otherwise, these won't hurt you in the end. So I'm going to be on this one. So I'm just going to paint some of these along this wall here. So I like this rectangular tool. So let's paint that so I can drag it all the way down. And let's put some on the other side. Oh, it didn't seem to work there. Well, that's interesting. Oh, so what we're seeing right now is I also need to change the layer. So we know the sorting layer. So we notice we can't see it here. So we need to go down to this tile map render on our hazards and on, tile map render. Here we go. And we need to set that to level. There, now we can see all of our spikes along our wall there. So that was a good thing to catch. Let's put some more on this wall. And we're just going to do this really quick. Add some more spikes there. And I think a good spot I know for sure is going to be some roof spikes here because this will be a trickier jump to navigate. Same with, I'm not going to make that one too hard. I'll paint a few there and a few there. Really common for these levels to have that. I'm pretty okay down here. I think I'll leave that be. I might put some side spikes here just to make it a little bit more dangerous, that last jump. And you get the idea. So we have a whole bunch of spikes now that can hurt us. Now, we need to create a new script now. We have this, and if right now, if we press play, we go back into game mode, nothing's going to happen. I can still run into these spikes, but it's not going to hurt me in any way. It's just not being treated as ground. So nothing's happening right now. So we need to do something with that collider. Okay. So what do we got to do? We're going to be making some scripts. So we're going to be going onto our player and we're going to be creating a new script on this player. So we're going to go down here to add component. I'm going to be, and we're going to do a new script. And we're going to be calling this death collision. Okay, we're going to use this for all of our ways to die in our game. So we're going to create and add that. And let's open it up. Just reloading. All right, there's our death collision right there. Okay, death collision. Let's check it out here. So first of all, for a death collision script, we are not going to use the start or the update at all. So we're going to delete those 2 right there. We are just detecting collisions here. And we're going to be detecting 2 kinds. We're going to be looking at normal collisions and trigger collisions. So we're going to dive into this right now. So what do we need? Well, we need a spot to respawn our character, and we're going to make that public. Okay, so I'll show you what I mean by this soon, but public transform. So this is going to store a position in 3D space for us, and this is going to be our respawn POS for position. Okay, so we're going to set that in the inspector. We also are going to need access to the player movement script that is on this same game object. So it allows me to find this really easy because I'm going to be talking to this script on the same game object. So I'm going to call this one just player movement lowercase. Player movement. Of course, we're going to need the rigid body here. So we're going to access the rigid body. Please make sure you pick the 2D version, and we'll just call it RB for short to make our life easier. And then that should cover us for now. That's all we're going to need. Okay, so let's do a collision script. So if you start typing in, and make sure, of course, your IntelliSense is turned on, assembly C#. If it's not, just make sure you change that setting. I've covered that in another video. But we're going to be going private. void and start typing on collision, and it'll nicely autofill this if we double click or use your arrow key and press tab, and that'll make sure you don't make any spelling mistakes. So this is going to detect any collision with any collider that is not a trigger when we enter it. Now there's regular on collision and there's on collision exit, but most of the time we want to detect it when we first enter a collision. Sometimes you'll use the other versions, but for us we won't be doing that. Okay, and in here we are going to need to make an if statement. Okay, because we have all kinds of collisions, so we want to check with what we're colliding with. What we collide with is stored right here, this collision object, this collision 2D object. So we're going to do an if statement, and in this if statement we're going to look at the collision, and we're going to specifically look at the game object it's attached to. Okay, and we want to figure out what layer is that on. Okay, and remember we made that our spikes have a special layer, and that layer was called hazard. So we're going to use a line of code here. We're going to access the layer mask, and it's called name to layer. Name to layer will then allow us to type in the exact name. There are other ways to do this. If you knew the integer of the layer, you could do it that way as well, but this is going to work just fine. So it's going to check that the layer mask is called hazard. Make sure you type that perfectly with capital H, matching how you labeled it in your layer masks. Okay, so if that is true, we need to do a few things. We want to first, it's really common when you are killed. This is basically going to be activating what happens when we die, our player movement script. We actually want to turn that off. So we're going to take the player movement, and there is a method here that we can look at enabled, and we're going to set that to false. That's going to turn off the script, and what that does is stops you being allowed to move, because when you die you shouldn't be able to move your player anymore. So we're going to set that to false. And also, why do I need access to the rigid body of the player? Well, we need to make sure we're going to turn on some of these constraints. Now, this is totally up to you. You can allow your player to have gravity act on it, but you're going to see later on why I find with this, especially when I teach you how to do a particle system, that you want to freeze the constraints. Now, this is optional, but this is going to take the rigid body constraints in the 2D, and we're going to freeze that position. Okay, not rotation. We want to freeze position. Freeze position. Okay, so that's going to stop the rigid body from being able to move whatsoever. It'll freeze it in mid-air. Now, you can take this out if you choose to, but I'll explain it when we game test. Okay, now we also need to turn off the collider that is on our game object. So game object allows me to access whatever game object this script is attached to, which that is our player. Okay, and then we're going to use a really common function called get component. Okay, and this get component allows me to access any of the components in the inspector, and I want the capsule collider 2D. That's what I want. And then it's nicely autofilling here, and I don't want it to be true, I want it to be false. The reason I'm doing this is because when I get killed by one thing like spikes, I don't want to be killed by other things again and continue to activate respawn after respawn. If I get hit, that's it. I want to activate the respawn function that we're going to be creating. I don't want to get hit by an enemy and then hit by a laser and then hit by something else. You just want to turn off that collider. Okay, now we're going to use a really great method here called invoke. So invoke allows me to, well, first I'm going to be creating a method called respawn, and I could go like this, and I could say respawn and then call that method. Okay, and it auto changed that. Let's fix that. Okay, there we go. It's going to be called respawn. And then down here, let's actually go and make this now. And I'm going to talk about how I'm going to change that with an invoke method. So we're going to make a void respawn. So let's figure out what do we want to have happen when we die. So this respawn method, we need a few things to happen. So we need to get the game object. Again, that's our player. And we're going to access its transform and we're going to set its position. Okay. We're going to set its position to its respawn position. Respawn. Whoops. Oh yeah, so this is the respawn position that I had up above. So respawn position, we're going to set that in the inspector. We're going to create an empty game object for that. Dot position. So this is going to put our player back where we want it to respawn that line of code. Next, we need to turn our capsule collider back on. So here's a smart way to do that. Let's just grab this whole line of code, or you can triple click. It'll grab that whole line. We're going to paste it right there, and I want to turn it back on, okay, because now we're going to be playing. We also need to turn back on our player movement, and the constraints we need to turn back on. So I'm going to take this RB constraints. Now we're going to have to do something a little bit fancy here because I want to turn these constraints. I don't want to freeze my constraints, my X and Y movement. I want to now set that to none. But I also, and I can use this also, this vertical bar here, which will allow me to do two things at once to the constraints. Instead of writing two lines of code, I'm going to take the rigid body 2D and I'm going to freeze rotation. So why I need to do that is because remember we freeze the Z rotation, but when I use this command none, it turns off all constraints. So I got to turn back on the freeze rotation constraint. So that way everything's back to normal. Next thing we need to do is enable our player movement. So again, I'm going to go back up here, grab this line of code, and we're going to paste that, but we're going to switch it to true. Okay, so now as this is going to work, and we're going to go and test this, but this respawn is going to happen immediately. Okay, so you're going to see how this works. So actually, yeah, let's go back into Unity here. And we're going to need to update our inspector with a few things. So first, our player, I'm going to set its respawn like classic platformers. I'm going to move our player just down here and over to the left. Okay, so I'm going to take this respawn point. Let's set this a little bit more defined. So -8. And for me, now this could be different for you, of course, but I'm going to go -3 on the Y. Okay, and so then what I'm going to create is create an empty. Okay, and an empty game object's only going to have a transform, and I'm going to call this a respawn point. Okay, and this respawn point, I'm going to set it, I'm going to just reset the transform, and I'm going to use the same one as here. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to go over here and paste. And that's an easy way to copy paste. So just to review that, I go to my player and I right click here in this open space here, and I can copy the entire position, all three values, and then paste it right here, no problem. Okay, so now I have my respawn position. So let's go back to our player. I'm going to close a couple things here because we got a lot going on. Let's close the animator. The death collision. Okay, respawn position. We have that. I just made it, so let's drag and drop that right here. So that's where I want my player to reappear after he dies. The player movement script, I need access to that, so that's easy. Just going to access like so. And the rigid body, again, we're going to pull that and write it in there. Okay, everything should be ready to roll. I think everything's good, so we're going to try and hit these spikes and see what happens. So here we are running around, jump and spawn. But look at what's happening. Like this is a little bit crazy. Okay, it is turning everything back on and off, but it's happening very fast. And what we probably want to have play is one of two things. Either when you hit the spikes, you want a specific animation to play, or I guess a cool particle system like an explosion, like a classic like Mega Man when he dies, or Celeste blows up into some particle system. So we're going to play around with that. Now, to change how this works, we're going to go back into our script, and I'm going to call this respawn method still, but I'm going to use something called invoke. And invoke allows me to put in a couple parameters. It allows me to put in the method name. I have to write it in like a string, but it allows me a float time. So it allows me to delay when the respawn occurs, which is exactly what we want to have happen. So I'm going to put the string in for this method, type it in perfectly. Respawn is what it's called, comma, and then the second parameter, I'm going to put in 2f. It needs to be a float, so make sure you put that f in there, and that's going to cause the respawn to occur after 2 seconds. So we're going to go and try this again. We're going to go run and into these spikes, and it should, when we test this, let's make this a little bit bigger. It should freeze everything, so I can't press anything, and then boom, it respawns me after 2 seconds. Okay, so that 2 seconds, you might be like, well, that's kind of silly. You're just kind of stuck to the spikes, and it doesn't make much sense. But you're going to see later that we can do an animation there for the death, or even better, in my opinion, a particle system. And we're going to turn off the sprite, and my player is going to explode. So we're going to show you how to do that in another video. But for now, I like this 2-second delay using this invoke method. Lets me activate it 2 seconds later. Okay, so we got some spikes, we got a respawn happening. How about another thing that's really common with vertical levels, and that's usually some type of rising hazard, making sure the player's moving at a certain speed. So I'm going to use a laser beam. You could make a pixel art, you could use lava or water. Those are super common. So I'm going to show you how to do that as well. So remember, I brought in this other piece of art over here, my laser beam. So I'm just going to quickly edit this. This is 32 by 32, and it's just a square, but I am going to be stretching it. It is multiple. It is in animation. So I'm going to change this to point and none. So we got that all taken care of. Apply that. Go to the sprite editor and quickly do a slice here. Again, I'll do grid by size this time just to review that. So 32 by 32, slice that up and apply. And now it's ready to go. Now, if I drag this into my scene, I'm going to have a very short laser beam, and you can't see it yet. So remember, I'm going to have to make a new layer here. It is calling for an animation because I'm dragging in this multiple sprite. So let's do that. Let's put it in our animations here. And we're just going to call it laser. Okay, simple. So we're going to put the laser in there. We can't see it right now, and that's because we need to go to our sprite renderer, and we need to create a new layer. I could put it on the level layer and we would see it, but I actually wanted the laser to go over top of everything. Okay, so I am going to add one more layer here, and I'm just going to call this the laser layer. Okay. And then we can go back to my laser beam. Let's rename this to just laser. And then now I can switch this to the laser sorting layer for how it's being drawn. Okay, now next thing what I want to do is, this laser doesn't look very good. I'm just going to use this as I'm going to use the scale here. I'm going to put this way up to 50. Okay, so you're never going to see the end of this laser. And I'm also going to bring this down to 0.5 because I like it to be a little bit skinnier. But you can play around this. This will be in your art folder, which is in the description as well as in the assignment. So here I'm just going to set this to 0, and I'm going to bring this down to start below. So you can kind of see it down there, but it hasn't activated. So let's set that at -7, I think, is a good spot to start this laser. Now, nothing's happening with this laser. It's not going anywhere. We got to do a couple things. We're going to add a tag. Now, this tag, I've already created it. It's called laser. So if you don't have that, make that, or whatever tag you want to create. We're going to use a tagging system rather than the hazard layer, and you're going to see why we're setting it up this way. Because later, well, you might have enemies, and you're going to create a different tag for enemies. So we need to add a 2D box collider here. And it's important on this box collider that we make it a trigger. I don't want it running into anything in my level. I just want it to move through everything nicely. So we're going to be doing a trigger collision here. But I do need to move the laser, and we're going to use that again with a rigid body. Now in the rigid body 2D, I'm going to quickly just change this. It's not absolutely required, but we don't want gravity or any physics acting on it. So we're going to change it to kinematic. And now it should be ready to go. I'm going to change that collision detection. Discrete will be fine because our player does have continuous set to it, and we don't need to do any constraints. So now this laser is ready to go. We just need to get it moving. So we're going to create a really simple script. So we're going to make another new script here, and we're going to call this rising laser. Why not? And press enter, and let's open it up. Okay, rising laser. What do we want to do with this thing? So again, here we are going to still use our start method. We're not going to be using the update. We're actually going to be using a fixed update because we're moving the rigid body, and we want to use the fixed update for any physics. But we're going to need a few things. We're going to need a public. We're going to access that rigid body 2D, and we'll call it RB as usual. We're also going to need a private. We're going to store this right at the beginning, a vector 2. This is going to be our laser start position. Okay. So there's our laser start position. We're going to store that right away in our start function. We're also going to be able to control the speed of how fast this laser rises. So we're going to make a public float, and we're going to call that laser speed. Or no, let's call it rise speed. That makes more sense. And we're going to set that to 1F for now. We can tweak that in the inspector, of course. And we're going to need a couple more things. So we're going to also need, how are we going to activate this laser? So when we start the game, we don't want that laser moving right away. What if we miss a frame or two, if it lags a little bit? We want it to start when the player starts to move upward. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a public float, and we're going to set this, we're making it public, so we're going to set this in the inspector. We're going to call this the laser, it's going to be a long name, activator height. Okay, so we're going to set that, and that we're making that public because all of our games are a little bit different, and you're going to want to set that height for when the laser starts to move. And to figure out where the at what position the player is at, we're going to just access its transform. So transform, and we're going to get the player position for that. Okay, so in our start here, all we're going to need to do is figure out where this laser position is starting, and rather than typing that in, we can access it right off the start wherever we've placed it. So the laser start position is going to be equal to the transform, which is accessing the transform. This is going to be attached to the laser game object and its position. So it's going to store it right at the very start, the first frame of the game. Okay, so let's get this thing moving. So in the fixed update, we're going to create an if statement that checks, hey, how far, what's the height of the player? So we're going to take the player position dot position dot y, that's going to access its height in the game, and we want to make sure that that is greater than the laser activator height. Okay, so if it is greater than that, we're going to start the laser moving. How are we going to do that? Simple. With the rigid body, we're going to go velocity. We're going to set that to a new vector 2, and we don't care about the x. The x isn't moving anywhere, so we'll set x to 0f. But we're going to be using the rise speed, and that's going to get things moving. And because the fixed update, as soon as this player position is greater, okay, it's going to turn this on. So the rise speed is just going to be setting the velocity. It's going to be a constant speed, which is what we want. We don't need to worry about where the position is after that. It's just turning it on. So think of it like that. Okay, so that's all ready to go. We're going to need a couple more things here though, because we're going to access these later. Because what happens when we die and we respawn? Well, we need to reset the later. So we're reset the laser. So we're going to make a public void. We're making this method public because we're going to access it from the death collision. So we're going to call this reset laser. And this is a super easy line of code. We're going to take the game object that we're attached to the laser and its transform and its position, and we're going to set it equal to the start position, just like that. Okay, now we also want to stop the laser. So I'm going to create a custom method just below here. We're going to use this stop laser method a couple times. So it doesn't know what we're talking about. So let's make it now public void stop laser. Okay, so in our stop laser method here, let's fix that to a semicolon. There we go. And in our stop laser, we're just going to again set the velocity just to 0. So this allows us to reset everything for basically a restart of our level. Okay, so this vector 2, we're now just going to be setting it to 0f, 0f for the x and the y speed. Okay. All right, laser is good to go. So let's go and test this. We're going to, of course, need to update a few things in our inspector once the scripts update. Okay, so let's go down to the rising laser. So we need to access this rigid body. That's easy. Drag and drop that there. We'll keep the rise speed at 1 right now. The activator height, well, we want to set that just above. So our player here is at a height of -3. So I think I'd like to activate this at -2. So just as soon as it starts to move up, that's, I think, a pretty good height to start things. So let's go back to my laser game object, and we're going to set that to -2. And the player position, we need that, just to access that straight from the player, and now it should be good to go. We got our tag here, and which we'll use that. Right now the laser's not going to hurt us at all. It is a trigger. We'll be able to walk right through it. We won't collide with it in any way. But I just want to make sure. So you do see my laser does have a little animation here, nothing fancy. But now I'm going to get it moving. So as soon as I go a little bit higher, we see our laser is rising up at a speed of 1. So I got to keep going without it getting me. But nothing happens when I hit that. Also, if I go and hit this, I reset, but the laser's still up there. I need the laser to reset as well. So now we need to fix that part of it. It's not hurting us, and it goes on forever if I hit the spikes, which doesn't make sense. So let's go back into our death collision here, and we're going to add a couple things that we didn't do before. So in our death collision, we need to access that game object. So we're going to go public game object, and we're just going to call that laser. So we're going to assign that in the inspector. And that's all we'll need right there. So now, so instead of an on collision enter, so it works with regular colliders that are not a trigger, we're going to be setting up a very similar method, but we're going to access the trigger. So private void on trigger 2D. There it is. Double click that. Auto fills. And here's the nice thing. We're almost going to copy this exactly, but we're just going to tweak a couple things. We're just going to grab this set of code here, this if statement. So we're going to paste that right in there. Now, we're not going to do a layer mask check. We're going to do a compare tag, because we're using a tag system, and this is going to help you when if you do other things. So instead of GameObject.layer, we're going to do GameObject.compare tag. Now compare tag, now I'm going to type in exactly the type of tag, the tag name that I gave it, which was laser. And if that's true, it'll run this set of code. So I still want the same thing. I want player movement to be turned off. I want the constraints to be turned off. I want to turn off the capsule collider as well. And I want to invoke the respawn after 2 seconds. So now this is all ready to go. Now, the other thing we do need to do is we need to reset that laser. Remember, we made those other methods over here in the rising laser. We have reset laser and the stop laser. We're going to access those now because up here we're accessing the game object laser. We're going to go down here in our respawn and we're going to add a couple things. So we're going to keep everything that we have here, but I think the best spot to put this in the order of the code is right after true. After we turn on our collider would be a good time to reset the laser. Okay, so this line of code is going to be a little bit advanced, but we're going to access the laser, okay, and then we're going to use something called get component from that. And we've seen this before. We're going to get the component, and this time what I'm getting is a script that we called rising laser. Okay, so now I'm going to access that script, and now that I've accessed that script, I can access any of its methods that are public. So we're going to do the reset laser method. Okay, so now that's working, and I think the reset laser, that should run the stop laser. Yeah, everything should be good to go here now. I think that's all we needed to add. We got our constraints, our player movement. So let's see if this works. So again, we made it a trigger. That way it's a laser that moves up and doesn't collide with anything else, because because if you had a regular collider, it would stop if it hit something. But it keeps moving as it's a trigger. And then if it and this is death collisions attached to the player. So it checks, hey, what did I collide with? If the thing that I collided with has the tag laser, we're going to turn off movement. We're going to freeze the constraints. We're going to then turn off also the Capsule Collider 2D, and we're going to invoke our special respawn method here after 2 seconds. So let's test that out, save it, and let's see how this works. All right, so in the laser, so let's go over to death collision. So I think we just have to, yes, so we need to access this laser game object. So I'm just going to drag that onto there, make sure so we don't have an empty reference, and let's test that out. Okay, there's my laser sitting down there. It's not moving until I go up. Okay, and then our laser's rising, and then if I hit the laser, I respawn. Perfect. And if I hit the wall, I respawn after 2 seconds. And the thing, I'll try to test this, but I wanted it to hit me. I want the laser to hit me while I hit the wall. So I'm just going to try and do this. So I'm hit this. This is perfect. So why I had to turn off the Capsule Collider, it was to make sure that I didn't respawn twice there. So with the Capsule Collider being turned off, then the laser hitting me after hitting the spikes won't cause a problem. Okay, so I'm going to stop the video there. Right now, yes, we don't have anything happening when we respawn here, but that's where we're going to be able to bring in an animation, or better yet, we already covered animations, and you could totally do that in your script. So that's what's going to be coming up. So right here on both of these invokes, okay, is where I'm going to be, and we can put in a comment here that we can put an animation. We can put, our death animation or a particle system, which what I'm going to show you in the next video. So we would take that and we could also put it here. And I think it's going to look really cool when we make this work. So that concludes this video. I know it was a longer one, but we had to cover a lot with colliders, but it does give you a really good idea how to check layer masks or check tags, and then apply some code to your player and set up a bit of a respawn system. You could modify this super easy too, to set up a bit of a checkpoint system where you would just store and change that respawn position as you went through different checkpoints. And again, you would do that with triggers. And so we'll revisit that in the upcoming videos. I'm going to stop it from there. Cheers.